Everybody doing good? Thanks for coming.
Well, hello. This is our writing and comics panel, and I'm going to spend a few minutes introducing these fine folks here. I'm Hannah Means-Shannon. I'm the editor-in-chief at bleedingcool.com, which is a pop culture news gossip site. And I know quite a lot of these people, and I'm certainly familiar with their work. If we had all of the books that these guys have worked on in one place, it would be very impressive. And they're all young. So here's some of the hardest working people in comics right now. In particular in the writing, a couple of these guys also do artwork. So that'll be interesting to see how they approach both and bring writing into that. So I'm going to go this way. Next to me we have Dan Goldman. His most recent work, which you'll see in the shops, is the collection of red light properties from IDW, which conveniently deals with exorcism and real estate in Florida, just the average sort of stories that you do. But he also does the artwork for that. It's a huge long-term project of his that's coming into publication in print after digital work. Also from 2006 Shooting War. So he's engaged with political discourse as well in his works. And he's had a lot of experience with web publishing through a platform called Activate. So that's Dan's perspective and where he's coming from. Next to him we have Dean Haspiel in the middle there. Dean is the Emmy Award-winning artist and Eisner and Harvey Award-nominated comic artist and writer of many of his own works. Most recently he's had a series with Red Circle Archie called The Fox with Mark Waid. And right now is drawing the Fantastic Four. So he's really in the mainstream at this point, but in the past he did autobio comics, a lot of digital publishing, very present on the web, and Brooklyn-based, like Dan here. So that's Dean for you. All you have to do is Google his name. You'll see lots of other things, including some Vertigo graphic novels, Cuba My Revolution. And from Z2 Comics, his most recent creator-owned project is Fear, My Dear, which he's got here at the con. If you'd like to pick it up, it's beautiful. Next to him we have Justin Gray. Justin Gray you'll find located partly on paperfilms.com, which is a collaborative platform he has for his work with Jim Palmiotti, Amanda Connor. He's worked heavily with DC Comics, Marvel Comics, Image Comics. He's all over, everywhere. Jonah Hex, Hawkman, The Monolith, Punisher, Marvel Adventures, Fantastic Four. We go back into Image Comics, Fear Agent, and Cloudburst. So he's really quite a presence.
I actually never got that Fear Agent.
Really?
Yeah, I was working with Rick on it, and I had a story written and gave it to an artist, and the artist vanished from the face of the earth.
Oh no, I'm sorry.
And neither one of us can figure out where he is.
Who said, why did you vanish him?
Yeah. I don't like this panel.
For a long time, I thought your first name was And.
I'm sorry,
It's true.
it's still out there as a credit for you. I didn't know necessarily, though Fear Agent has been recently recollected.
I know. I
Dark Horse.
talked to Rick about it every once in a while. Like, did he ever come back?
Aw,
I don't know what happened to that guy.
Rick did something.
maybe someday.
Yeah, Rick took care of
We
it.
hope to get there.
It was a fun story.
I'd like to read it.
Okay.
Anyway,
And
anyway, Fred Van Lente on the end down here. Wow. Okay, so he gets a New York Times bestseller title.
What?
Incredible Hercules, and Marvel Zombies, and Cowboys and Aliens, and we have lots of things here. We have Spider-Man, we have X-Men Noir. He's been nominated for many awards and honors.
Hercules.
Yeah.
Hercules.
I'll say some of my favorites. Archer and Armstrong with Valiant right now. Brain Boy with Dark Horse. He's working on the Project Black Sky webcomic for Dark Horse, which ties together all their superhero lines. It's ongoing right now, so go and read it at projectblacksky.net. I should have mentioned that Fred has a play that's shortly coming out in Brooklyn at the Comics Theater Festival called Kirby.
As does Dean.
As Dean has a play also, I should have mentioned, called Switch to Kill, which is a noir gangster story that's still ongoing. They're playing throughout the month of June in Brooklyn, but King Kirby is about Jack Kirby with Crystal Skillman, and it's something you really want to check out. It's very interesting. Maybe we'll ask you a little bit about that. What's that?
I said I'm really not qualified.
I know. I didn't expect. I
Turning
would.
into the playwrights panel.
When I was assigned this panel, I was not assigned a panel with two playwrights, but now it is. So it's happened since
Officially.
then.
1.5. I call
Yeah.
it mine.
Okay.
Although, Hannah, if I may interrupt because you've done the bios,
Yeah.
two questions arose for me as you were delivering the bios, or not questions, but two quick things. Fred, in your Hercules series, I think there was something you were doing with sound effects,
Right.
which was,
Well, Nate Cosby, our editor, started this. Hercules spun out of an event book called World War Hulk, which I find very hard to say.
the rural juror.
World War Juror, right. And that's something he was doing with crazy sound effects. We sort of continued that.
Like John Martin sound effects?
Well, like,
Stoink and-
They're like onomatopoeia.
Onomatopoeias and like the sound effects were what was happening in the panel.
Like, you punched me in the face.
We turned oh no he didn't into a sound effect.
Right. Oh no, you
my
didn't.
favorite Hercules sound effects was Amadeus Cho, who was one of the main characters in the book, was fighting Thor, and all the sound effects were IKEA products. And almost no one picked up on
That's
that.
awesome.
But I wish I could, say some of them now, but that would require me to remember the names of IKEA products. But that was probably my favorite.
I remember it's almost like hashtags now where you take a sentence and you have to figure out what the hell is it. It was almost like that. It was before Twitter hashtags.
Crocajama was probably the favorite one. Greg came up with that. Greg Pak, my co-writer, came up with that one.
And then the second thing, Justin, you were saying how you had written this story that never got realized.
Quite a few of them.
Quite a few of them. Do you do what I have done and then rejigger them for other stories?
Of course.
Okay. Not yet.
Yeah. Yes.
You have.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah,
Do
if
we
you
all
don't
do
clean
that?
It goes somewhere else. If
Yeah.
they pass, then
Right.
you fix it into something else.
Have you ever written a story that couldn't be done that way? I've written two that had to be what got shot down, and there's no way it could be transposed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, do you mean rewriting it for the person who shot it down, or do you mean just saving
Oh
it
no,
and then
no, like
re-showing it somewhere
it got
else?
shot down, and there's no way you could reuse it or
Right.
It was so specific to that.
very specific to the characters. So I've done that twice now, and I realize that's not the best thing to do. But sometimes you do write. I love to play with the toys. I have my own creator-owned stuff, but then there's Marvel, DC, and other characters. And sometimes you just have an idea for that character specifically, and you just hope and pray that the editor will buy it. And when they don't, then it just sits in a drawer. And then you put it online later and let the fans go, why wasn't that made? Come on, man.
That's the small justification.
Yeah, I know.
I'm wondering whether I should use that as a segue into one of my questions for you all, which is, tell us about the difference for you as a writer doing creator-owned projects versus working with pre-established properties and the big two or established properties that have been handed to you. What's your preference? And I'm sure there's some pros and cons to both. Could you share that with people? For those of you who don't know, the movement right now, creator-owned comics, is very big, where the creators retain rights to their characters, both the artists and the writers, perhaps. And even through publication companies like Dark Horse and Image, you still retain the rights to those characters, even though you're publishing through them. So that's what we call creator-owned comics. You could also perhaps do your own webcomic or just publish online, and then that's also creator-owned. No one else owns that. And then if you work for, on Spider-Man or something, Marvel owns that. So there's a difference between the
It's
two.
an important difference.
Yeah.
And as a footnote, I think some of us in the panel would agree with this, but when I was younger, I thought you only could write a Marvel or DC character when I was a kid. So that was my dream, was to one day, and then little by small, I saw Harvey Picar's American Splendor, Chester Brown's Yummy Fur, and I realized you could create your own universes or tell stories about your life. And little by small, I kind of went up the ranks, still having a dream and a desire to write franchise characters or be involved in some way. But eventually started creating my own. But yeah, I guess we'll start with Dan. You just had experience with Valiant?
Yeah, I was going to say, I've only done creator-owned stuff until like 6 weeks ago. And I have a really short little story coming out with in an issue of Valiant's Harbinger. Mm-hmm. And my experience so far, having done 5 pages of that, is that I don't like being rewritten more than twice. Or asked to rewrite more than twice. I think that's a bummer. I think that's true with art too. Like when I've done freelance jobs and illustration jobs, by the time you draw or redraw somebody's face for the 3rd or 4th time, you really, it kind of sucks the electricity out of it. I'm not saying that my story in Harbinger number 25 doesn't have any electricity, because that's not the case, but I've never had to do that with my own stuff. I get it the way I want it. What I do is when I'm writing and drawing my own stuff, I'll do the script, you know, rewrite the script until I'm happy with it, then I draw, and then as I'm lettering, I rewrite the script again. And that's for me where everything clicks. So I do get.
Are you completely self-edited, or do you have somebody you run it by, or?
I have been self-edited. The last Red Light Properties book that just came out, I worked with an editor at the very end, and she was amazing, actually.
Okay.
But that was the first time that I had an editor do more than isolate typos, which was pretty cool. I look forward to having an editor again. I like that a lot.
Yeah, that process is good when they're in tune with you, when they're actually part of the process as opposed to sort of functioning as software.
Right. I mean, if they're like shoring up the storytelling or
And showing you things that you didn't see before, or
Mhm.
you know, inspiring you to go into different directions. And sometimes that happens.
Well, you're most known for, I guess, writing with someone else, Jimmy Palmiotti, right? So what's that like? How'd that start?
It starts out not having an ego, because I don't take myself very seriously. I mean, like if I was curing cancer, I'd be the biggest jerk on you. Like I cure cancer, you guys. But you know, what I do, I don't take it seriously. What I do seriously, but I don't take myself seriously about it.
Right.
So when we collaborate, there's no problem saying that's terrible, or that needs more work, or this doesn't work at all, without me going, I can't stand you, you're on my face.
Can you tell us the process? I'm so curious. The process between you and Jimmy. Like, do you come up with? Do you talk on the phone about a plot idea?
Talk on the phone.
And then what happens next?
Are you stalking Jimmy Palmiotti?
I'm yeah. I want to know what he does. I want to know what he does. So
It's
what
all
happens?
me. No.
Do you type up the first draft? Does he type up the first draft?
Depends on what it is and who goes to it and who's more familiar with the characters, or if it's like with the monolith. He said, I always had this idea about there's a golem trapped in a tunnel between Brooklyn and Manhattan. I was like, oh, then what if we do this? And then what do you do that? How about this character? And let's bring this character to life. And then, okay, we need to have these kinds of personalities. And what would you do? And let's not just make it a book contemporary. Let's go all the way back to the history of Brooklyn and New York and the gangs. And it just kind of fans out from there. And then whoever's more excited at the moment might do the first draft and then send it. You know, I'll get a draft and I'll write. I'll go in and I'll rework dialogue or change it or say this scene's not strong enough or this scene's. Basically, we keep disassembling each other's work.
What do you feel if you could isolate like what you bring to the table versus what Jimmy brings in terms of like specific, like what he's really good at and what you're really good at? Is there something like that between you two?
I think there is, but we have varying strength levels. He's really good at conceptualizing a big idea and getting excitement generated for a big idea. And I tend to get bogged down into the sort of minutia of dialogue and character interaction, and I like to watch characters grow, which is not always easy when you're doing work for hire because they can only grow to a certain point.
Right.
But we both, we'll come at each other with the big idea and then say, does it have legs? Does it not have legs? What have we seen? What haven't we seen? Because we both we have different mentalities, different aesthetics, but we also agree on enough for the middle line that when we come together, we're like, well, okay, that's this and that, And I've seen that movie, but I never saw them do this in that kind of movie or that genre.
When Greg Pak and I started co-writing Incredible Hercules, we'd never co-written anything before, so we were super literal about it. Like, he would write one half and then give it to me, and then I would write the other half. And there you go. And,
When you say half, you don't mean like pages 1 to 10, 11 to 20.
That's exactly what I mean.
Come on.
Oh, no, I'm totally serious.
Did he ever
Yeah, we'd
leave
never
you-
done it before. We had no idea what we were doing. We were like,
leave you on a cliffhanger, and then you'd have to like. figure
hopefully,
something out?
it'd be awesome. And then as we got sort of more comfortable with it,
It's like a narrative corpse.
yeah.
Here you go, get out of that
I mean, we would talk about the story beforehand, but then after a while, what ended up happening, partially because Marvel was doing double shipping, and it was convenient in other ways, is he would take an entire arc, and then I would take an entire arc, and then we would just trade off and kind of co-write it until it was, definitely our own.
Did you ever disagree?
Always, constantly.
But to the point where you're about to throw fisticuffs.
I know it's hard to believe.
You look like a
looking
brawler.
at me, I'm not. I've never tried to solve my problems with my fists because that means that I can never solve any problems.
But you've written that though.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe if I was arguing with a small child, I would attempt fisticuffs. But no, we generally worked it out. And the no ego thing is super important. And just not take it personally. And we kiss and hug, and then at the end that was a rule of mine. Spoon afterwards, very important. But yeah, no, I mean, we're still good friends today.
When you spoon, are you in the front or in the back?
Hey, that's a great question. Alternate. Are we talking about Monday, Wednesday, or Friday? Or are we talking about
Okay.
Tuesday, Thursday, weekend?
I don't want him to
weekend, it's
answer
all
it.
program.
You don't answer the spoon question.
I thought this was the spooning.
Sorry.
I got some bad information.
I'm hoping we'll circle back to the creator-owned versus company thing, but first I'll notice that Dean has not answered his own question about collaboration,
Oh,
because
no.
he and Mark Waid on The Fox were sharing some writing duties. I mean, Dean was the artist, but
What are you
he was
hiding,
very
Dean?
much writing as well.
I'll tell you the honest truth. First of all, two things happened. What is this, like network? I've always wanted to work with Mark Waid, number one. But he's so busy that it's hard to get him to work on and collaborate on something. So when I pitched my idea for the Fox to Red Circle, one of the things I thought in my mind was like, well, maybe I can get an opportunity to work with Mark in this way, where if I plot it and he adds dialogue, because if you ever read a Mark Waid comic, the dialogue is amazing. And he's also a fantastic storyteller and plotter as well, plot being the basic story. But since I was already taking care of that, and he was going to police it a little bit. If something wasn't working, he'd let us know. Luckily, things were working in my story idea. So what I got the opportunity to have is a guy make my comic sing, if that makes sense, with Mark Waid. Also, totally honest answer, I wanted the comic book to sell, okay? Mark Waid is an award-winning writer. And I had an opportunity here to draw and plot 5-issue story, but I'm not really known as a guy to be a writer in comics. I mean, I've done my own, you asked a question about creator-owned stuff. Creator-owned stuff, you can take a lot more risks, especially if you're putting it out online. There is no one telling you what not to do in your own comics, okay? But the minute you try to sell an idea, suddenly people are telling you what works, what doesn't work, what they want. Comics have changed a lot, and they've changed dramatically since when I was an assistant to Howard Chaykin, Walter Simonson, Bill Sienkiewicz. Back when a lot of those guys, like Walt Simonson on Thor, he wrote, Mark Grunewald was the editor. He gave Walt Simonson carte blanche to do whatever he wanted with a book that wasn't selling well, and then he uplifted it with his own ideas. So a lot of it was bottom up. Now I believe comic books are written top down, meaning coming from editorial. Coming from, and the fact that we have all these big Hollywood movies, I think that the people in the blue suits think that, oh, well, our comics have to kind of like go in line with the movies. I believe the opposite. I think that people who go see an Avengers movie, they're not going to necessarily go to a comic book shop if you can find one and buy an Avengers comic. And half the time when a movie comes out, like Batman's dead in the comic book while he's alive in the movie. It's just a weird thing. But now Marvel's kind of getting it right in certain ways, where they are aligning. It's almost like the movies are an extension of the comic books and vice versa. But it is more top down. Am I right about that, guys who are working?
Don't you think that puts constraints on things though? We're like totally like we can't kill right, but you can't kill somebody because there's a movie coming out in 2017.
Yeah, but at the same time, stop killing the heroes. I'm so bored of that. The apocalypse has gotten very boring in comics.
They're running out, fortunately.
Yeah.
They're finally killing off the one guy whose power is he can't be killed. So that's
Yeah.
the guy with the adamantium bones.
But to the short answer is that I grew up thinking I would maybe pencil the Fantastic Four one day, which is odd because that's what I'm doing right now. But I didn't have dreams or aspirations or the confidence to be a writer in comics until eventually I was staring at a blank page and I wanted to draw and I had no story. So I had to fill that blank page.
That's funny though to me because I had the opposite where I never dreamt of doing. I mean, I love Spider-Man, but I never dreamt one day I'm going to do Spider-Man. I had a moment where I was in a record store and I found Love and Rockets, and Love and Rockets was a doorway for me, not just into the idea that you can tell any kind of story in comics, but there was also this. It was a window into the time that you're living in as well.
Mm.
I mean, I would write down, I would take notes with Love and Rockets. I would write down the names of any T-shirts, any bands that were on people's T-shirts, and then go back to the record store and check out those records. And it was like something contemporary in the culture that you were feeding into and learning from and feeding back into, and that's a totally different type of. For me, comics were a way to tell stories, like full stop. And it was not about I mean, I could tell my stories. I could tell any kind
Right,
of story. I
personal
wanted to.
stories.
Well,
Right.
and to bring it back to what Hannah asked originally, one of the things that I like about doing work for hire is that you do have restrictions. I mean, with creator owned, you generally speaking have carte blanche to do whatever you want, and sometimes it's nice to take a vacation from your own head and be told, or at least be given a structure by an editor or by a corporate mandate or by a branding initiative or whatever, or an event or whatever it is. And while it's both limiting, it's literally limiting, but sometimes limitations are good because you don't just run off all over the place.
Not only limitations which breed a certain kind of art, but deadlines.
Sure.
If you're working on your own comic, you could take forever. Okay?
And many
A
do.
deadline, you need something to turn around in a couple of weeks, you find out who you are. In certain ways.
Come on. I mean, if you are doing your own creator-owned work and you still have deadlines, you also find out who you are.
Oh, it's true. It's true. I'm doing a comic called Mr. Dramato next. It's a very dramatic series. I'm kidding.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of that one.
Was that a joke?
No.
We didn't hear from Justin about what project of yours have been creator owned or what have been with big companies. I know you've been with companies a lot.
I've had a lot of company, yes.
Yes.
Sometimes too much. I feel a lot of the times the material itself is creatively stifling in the sense that I like growth and I like change. I'm one of those wackos that likes characters to change and to grow. And I mean, you don't have to George R. R. Martin all of them, but there can be changes and not just generational changes. Yeah, the deadlines. I hate deadlines. I used to work in restaurants, and you had to show up for yourself. If you didn't do well, everybody in the kitchen knew you were garbage at your job, and you wouldn't have it for very long. And you knew who was garbage in your job, and you would get rid of them. So when I got into comics, I had that same mentality. It was pretty abrasive at first. A lot of people didn't like me, but so deadlines and that stuff, I can't stand that kind of stuff because I don't function under creative pressure. Because then you get garbage. Some people you can get gold out of them, and with me it's just garbage because I feel like I'm rushing through to appease a mandate or something that has to be done. You're essentially filling in the blanks on something, which I don't like to do. I like creator-owned stuff, but I also feel like it has to be done within a time frame of my attention to it.
I think you're talking about what I call technician work. It's like you suddenly are being hired to be a technician.
Right.
And some people are really good at that. I don't know. I've never had experience with that really. And I have a couple times when it was teetering toward that, I did feel like, oh, this is going to be garbage what I'm about to produce. And I hate that.
I can't stand
You have to kind of let it go because I also work on the mantra of don't let the perfect get in the way of the good.
Mm-hmm.
If you can make something good, maybe that's good enough. I don't know what my writing or art looks like if I had time because I've never really given myself the time.
I think you should.
Maybe. I don't know. I'm afraid to see what that looks like because it may not be as good as I want it to be.
Well, for what it's worth, I spent a couple of years. I left New York. I moved to South America, and had a studio with myself, basically. And I produced all of this red light property stuff down there. And so that's what. And I think that's the best or strongest work I've ever done. Mm-hmm. And I think that when you're able to, even if it's for a month, like you've done artist retreats and whatnot.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I think that when you subtract yourself from all the noise and responsibility and everything, you really get down to, looking, like
Core.
looking. Yeah, you get a purer conduit to.
I think you can lose sight of where you started from after a period of time. I've been doing something for a long period of time, and there's definitely days where I go, what am I doing? This is not what this is not what interests me.
Mm-hmm.
This is not the stories or the stories I want to tell. And that's not all. It's not all the time, but there's definitely instances if you function within that, an environment where you're working for hire, it can play havoc with you because you have deadlines. You have to keep going. You have to keep the work coming in. No one else is going to get the work for you, and then you start to realize, I really wanted to tell a simple story about a person going through this in life. And sometimes you find yourself trying to shoehorn those aspects into a place where they don't belong, and it's hard. It's hard to do that.
Before you were talking about growing characters, I've noticed that I think especially in cable, HBO and AMC, that's what they do. A season is like a long arc. It used to be each episode was a whole story, kind of like what comics used to be. Now they are growing and seeding. Now I think what Stan Lee and Jack Kirby did in the 60s is now 6 issues. That one issue they did is now 6 issues.
Yeah.
I was actually about to ask you all, because you're talking about stories and characters, and I've been asking you more about like this business aspect of creator-owned versus companies, but like any type of writing, this is about intense creativity of creating characters and stories, and yet it's so commercial working within these parameters. But what for you makes you want to write a character? And at what point do they become real for you if you're the one who's created them? And you commit, because you must have a million ideas, but you select the one to pursue to the end.
It depends. I mean, a lot of times it's a scene, it's a specific scene that the character is going to do, and you want to see that, or it's a quirk, or it's sort of a concept that you kind of go with it. Sometimes it's what the plot requires, and then the character itself kind of becomes interesting in his or her own right. But it varies radically.
I always look at a cast of characters in whatever I'm working on as like, I really treat it as a conversation with myself, different pieces of myself kind of bouncing off each other, or, you know, in a room together maybe having a heated argument, and that's where drama comes from. And but it also is where personal investment comes from. Like you can it's like you put on a mask and say something, and then you put on a different mask, and you know, you just sort of rotate masks for however long the story is, and I find that really helps me get there and get to the root of them.
Kind of like a call and response, right? Like you throw something down and then you respond to it, and you try to use different like ideas and thoughts. Like I have a character called Billy Dogma that I visit once in a while. It's not a monthly comic book series. It's something that takes me a while to figure out every time. And I started to realize after I made a few of them that I had certain trends that I kept revisiting in this story, something I'm working out. So it really is kind of like my personal comic that's maybe not meant to be mainstream. But I also don't know what mainstream is because it changes all the time. But having said that, I do try to think about bigger ideas when I do pitch to the companies, because that's what they're trying to sell. You know, it's wonderful, like in the mainstream there's a couple of comics like Hawkeye or even Moon Knight recently with Warren Ellis. I love Mark Waid's Daredevil. There seem to be a few comics in the mainstream that are kind of like sidestepping the big event comics, which is what DC and Marvel have become. I don't really read those. I can't. I don't want to buy all the comics. It all feels like filler half the time. And how many times can there be a huge event? Like that's something that's special you need to earn, I believe. And maybe it's because I'm 47 years old too. I don't know. But I do enjoy like the quieter comics, let's call them, you know?
I think that, and this goes for comics, this goes for novels, this goes for movies, when there are punches and explosions, it means they've run out of story. It means something needs to move the plot forward. That, like, there's a hole here, let's cover it up with an explosion or a fight.
I think it's also, the audience has been trained. The audience has been trained to, this is what's exciting. I only have so much money.
Right.
You know, and it's expensive going to a movie.
The literal bang for your buck.
It is. It's the theory that, you know, it's the old Roman theater where it's what do you have to show me? Now
Right.
what's going to explode and blow my mind? And just keep pushing in that element. But real people aren't as interesting as people who are in incredible shape and can wear any color and can fly
And can wear any color.
That was adorable. I have to say, that was adorable.
Yeah. It's funny you say that because
pasty. I don't know what to
are you a fan of Sergio Leone, the filmmaker?
Yes.
That guy not only built character, but it might have taken 20 minutes before somebody pointing a gun and then shooting it.
Right.
It was that long, like, and it's
You watch
only,
sweat roll down.
Yeah.
And be like,
Or even speaking,
or even talking.
you know? You just hear like something
Unbelievable.
creaks.
Good, Bad, and the Ugly, what, the first 16 minutes?
Yeah.
I mean, no.
Once Upon a Time in the West.
Right.
If you haven't seen Once Upon a Time in the West, please, that is pure storytelling, the first scene.
Yeah, if you
it's
want
a whole movie.
Right. If you want to know how to write for comics, like there's a visual language in the opening part of that movie that is.
That's a whole other discussion.
Right.
The fact that the visual storytelling. I was telling some guys asked me how to draw comics. I'm like, I don't know, but I know what I like to watch. I know what's engaging and what's not. I said, don't just put down set pieces and then draw them.
Right.
I recently was asked, and I think this was going to be one of your questions, was like, are there good examples of comics that are for comic book writing, let's call it, right?
Yeah, like what is, for each of you, what is something that you hold up or have recognized and felt this is great comic writing, and how do you decide that? What do you think are the traits that have convinced you of that? Don't answer in film. Well, maybe you can.
No, I have two comic
You
books.
guys are all film buffs, so you guys
Right.
are going to want to answer.
I think a lot of writers are,
Yeah.
and comic book writers are film buffs. I mean, films are awesome. But for comic books, I can give quick two examples. Scalped. Anybody read Scalped by Jason Aaron? Unbelievable. It's heartbreaking. Probably my favorite series of the last decade. Hey, what?
I'm like, how are you sitting on this property? Why is this not on HBO?
I know. I know. It's ridiculous. But having said that, like, it's just a beautiful marriage of art and text, and character based. Sure, there are certain, the story means something, but really you fall in love with the characters. You fall in love with the villains, the bad guys, everybody. It's everyone's great. There isn't a real hero or a real bad guy. Everything comes to a head. But there was a comic book series I read that as I was reading it, I realized it was also educating me. Meaning, I was reading a comic for entertainment, but then suddenly I was also I was looking at it and going, oh my god, I could use this as an example of how to make comics by looking at it. And that's Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely's All-Star Superman, which I love Superman the movie as a kid, and I liked George Reeves, bending a gun in half, to stop the villain back in the day, but I'm not a big Superman fan because he's impossible to write. A guy that can almost do anything, that's not easy. How do you do that on a monthly basis? Well, Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely did it in 12 issues, and that's all you'll ever need for your Superman story. But I realized that I was watching very deliberate panel making of how does Clark Kent function, how does Superman function, and the people around him. It's just a brilliant...
And it's still minimalist, too.
It's so minimalist.
Packing it in there.
But surgical, and yet it's entertaining. And meanwhile, if you really look at it, it's also teaching you comics.
Is Scalped online?
Scalped is probably if they're doing, you mean the Comixology type thing? I'm sure it has to be. It's amazing.
It's from Vertigo, right?
And Vertigo, yeah.
From Vertigo, from DC.
Why the Last Man was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Brian K. Vaughan is an amazing writer. Saga is his recent series with Fiona Staples. And that's another thing, just to bounce back to it real quick, sorry to dominate here. But a lot of people seem to think that to get into writing comics is to try to get an Image Comics series. Then Marvel or DC poaches you. You go write a series for them for 12 issues or 2 or 3 years, and then you boomerang back and you go back to your original creator-owned stuff.
Should I be ready this time?
Yeah. It's like, you're just building a fan base to eventually have fun with the toys and then come back to your own and make your own toys.
And hope you can have enough of that fan base come over, because Morrison's creator-owned stuff doesn't sell as well as his corporate
right.
stuff.
That is the thing. I mean, that's what we talk about when we talk about
But Brian's the other
creator-owned
one.
creator-owned comics right now. I think more than any other era in comics, this is about building a fan base for your individual work, or you and your team, or who you like to work with, and you're hoping they're going to follow you wherever you go, and that will give you a career.
Well, it's been a progression from not having cut names on the cover to having 47 names on the cover to, saying we have to brand ourselves because we don't want to be 67 years old with a bad heart.
Right.
No one's taking care of us, even though they love our stories.
And there's almost no such thing as an exclusive contract anymore. Everyone's a freelancer, which opens things up and makes you could do several projects at once if you want to.
Everybody's a freelancer in every single field now.
I know, yeah.
That whole idea of having a set job, like for the rest of your life,
We're all expendable.
is gone, like globally.
There's pros and cons to that because, like I said, you're not locked in, and you can't. They aren't saying you're doing a Western for us, you can't do sci-fi for them. But it's hard.
You know what? That's fine, because there are definitely people who who look at it differently from everyone else, and there's the people who look at it as a steady job. I have a safe, secure job. I have health insurance. I have a guaranteed contract. It's scary running around and being freelance all the time and having to generate work and having to cultivate and maintain a fan base and stay relevant long enough. I mean, staying relevant, Mark Waid has stayed relevant for a long time. Not a lot of people like Grant Morrison. There's not a lot of these guys that have had the lifespan. There's thousands of people on the side of the road of comics as it's going forward.
And entertainment has long been a star-driven industry, and I think the question is, are you a star who's employed and working work for hire and making money for somebody else, or are you doing your own creator-owned stuff and making money for yourself, or are you doing both? I mean, I think that most people, even the folks, even Brian K. Vaughan has a day job in TV. I think that in order to have a middle or upper middle class existence, you kind of need to
And I don't think there's any shame in that either.
No,
I
not at all.
don't think like there's this idea. I know some people have this idea that you have to choose teams, and that's not just in comics. That's all over the place. I've got friends that write novels, and there's a big in the novel writing community. There's a big are you a self-publisher? I'll just Kindle my own stuff. And if you write for a regular book publisher, you're a sellout. And there's that kind of chatter in their online communities too. And the truth is, the people that are really successful do everything, and you have to. That's just flexibility and being able to pour yourself into multiple containers at the drop of a hat is really the way you survive in 2014 going forward.
Diversification is huge right now.
And in comics, you have a leg up if you can draw too as a writer. So, I mean, for a long time, I looked at Frank Miller and Paul Pope as heroes, as examples, because Paul Pope had his Batman, Frank Miller had his Batman and Daredevil and other comics, but then he had Sin City and Ronin and other comic books, and then Paul Pope had THB, and now he's Battling Boy, and they hopscotch between the two, and they basically to the point where it's Paul Pope's Batman or Frank Miller's, Dark Knight, whatever. But that's really difficult to obtain as well. But that to me is the brass ring if you're going to stay in comics.
And if you think that way, though.
Right.
I never thought I was going to be Chris Claremont, whatever, just throwing a name out. I just thought, and it was weird because the things you want before you start doing something, before you start actualizing that this is a business, it's an industry, you come in sort of a little bit rosy-eyed, and then you can shift quickly, and depending on the kind of person you are, and say, oh, this isn't what I thought it was at all, and it depends on what you want to do, what your end goal is, and I don't know that everyone's end goal is the same, other than being successful, being happy with what you're doing, and producing work that you're proud of.
Did some other people want to comment on what they hold up as a really well-written comic that they kind of aspire to be that good? Or
I mean, probably my biggest influence as a kid was Steve Gerber, who wrote a lot of Marvel and DC in the 70s and 80s. And I think what sort of distinguished him for me was not just his humor, which is a lot in my work as well, but he also wrote about things he read in the newspaper. Like, he did superhero comics that actually, however often ham-fistedly it was done, still was about, air pollution and the oil crisis and things that were big in the 70s, and so I'm not a big fan of the form of genre writing that it's like I'm hanging out with my fictional buddies, you know what I mean? Like, I want a story to be actually about something and to sort of relate to the human element beyond I like you like me, that kind of stuff, So he's probably my biggest influence as a writer of at least a mainstream comics.
I can totally see that. I could go. I'm a really big fan of, especially as a writer-artist, of this guy drawing manga named Naoki Urasawa.
Oh, yeah.
He's fantastic, and he has a series. He's got a bunch of series that are all worth checking out that are in English now. But specifically, there's one called 20th Century Boys, which is really, really tremendous. It's almost like it's kind of like the Japanese Watchmen, but without superheroes. And he handles emotion, writing, and then the way that everything is staged just takes already great writing and just lifts it up to the sky. He's fantastic. And then there was another one I just blanked out.
Pluto is my favorite.
Yeah, Pluto is fantastic. All of his stuff is great. Monster is great. And then there's another one that is older that is coming into English, I think, next year that I can't wait for.
Monster's going to be an HBO series.
Is it really? Oh, with Guillermo del Toro, right? Isn't he involved in
Yeah.
that? Oh, wow, I can't wait to see that. I know there's an anime, I don't know if you've seen.
No, I've never seen any of the animated Urasawa stuff.
Yeah, they did the whole Monster series, I think it's like 60-something episodes. It's pretty cool. In his art animated looks kind of like Sandman Mystery Theater.
Sure.
Guy Davis, anyway. Nerd! And then there was something else I was going to bring up too. I mean, the low-hanging fruit for me would be the Hernandez brothers, because they write human stories about people, and there have been very few comics that have made me cry that hard. Is when I've read particular Love and Rocket stories that are, there's really nothing like their work in the rest of the medium, and everybody who loves comics should know lots and lots of Hernandez brothers comics.
I forgot, did Justin answer that about?
Oh, I don't read comics.
Oh, well, just film?
You and Stan Lee.
You can answer with a film, we'll let you answer with a film if you want.
You know, my
that's
mind
not
always
fair.
blanks on these things because I consume so much and so many different things are interesting to me. I think I actually need a break from some stuff. I'm very much into nuanced storytelling. I'm into filling scenes and having something, layering things and texturing things and seeing that the scenes are not like a lot of films now and comics. There are certain guys who can draw things, guys and gals, because Amanda does amazing with it. They populate the book with things you don't even think about, little nuanced things. You're busy thinking about how I'm going to get this plot, I'm going to put this together, and they're off drawing cats wandering through things. And Eduardo Risso does great background stuff.
Yeah.
And,
With the kids skateboarding at Washington Square Park. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
In 100 Bullets, there's this great scene with these guys. It's like two guys having a killer meeting on the park bench, and behind them are these guys skateboarding, and you keep waiting for the kids skateboarding to get into a fight, or one of them's going to kill the other one, and it just never happens. And the camera just sort of like floats you around the park while you're in the conversation. I hijacked your answer. I'm sorry.
No, please help me out. So when I look at material, sometimes it's ham-fisted, like, oh, I put a glass of syrup because I'm going to break them in 20 minutes. Stay tuned for that. But and I was telling someone asked me about art again, and I said, learn to draw the real world and then populate it with fantastical, because then you'll see things in a totally different light and you'll associate people with that. Like it's easier to see the fantastical in the ordinary than it is to just be swept into some place your mind doesn't know where the four walls are. You know what I mean? I don't know if that makes sense. I tend to ramble.
Yeah, so you need like the foundational real world identification and setting before you can sort of lift up from
And
that.
everything you do should tell a story. My favorite, I think my most recent favorite act of storytelling is Wall-E. There's no fat on that film.
Yeah.
Every single moment of that film is pushing you towards the conclusion, but not in a way that feels rushed, not in a way that you get bored and see it coming. You know it's coming, but the way that they execute it, I just think it's a great storytelling device. Or the silent scene in Up, Pixar.
That killed me.
If you don't cry at that, get out.
Yeah.
Well, before we take questions, shall we do the origin story? What was the first thing that you ever created in comics / wrote, and what caused that for you?
It was professionally?
Yeah, let's say it doesn't have to be professional, actually.
Oh, they just draw goofy stuff when I thought I could draw.
Just drawing stuff when you were like
Went
a
to art
teenager.
class and they were like, oh, you can't draw. No, but I co-wrote a book with Jimmy called Chastity Reimagined for Chaos Comics. And I pitched a story for that where it was a reimagining of basically it's the 17th century or whatever, and it was a troupe of Shakespeare performers going around, and they were all vampires, so at the end of the show they ate everyone, and then they moved on. He didn't like that one, so it ended up being something completely different. So.
I did a comic called Tranquility. I was lucky enough that when I went to Syracuse, I ran into a bunch of people who would later become big comic artists and became big parts of my life, and one of them was named Steve Ellis, who's probably best known for doing a great webcomic called High Moon. And we did a comic together in the 90s called Tranquility that was about a woman it was a cop on a moon base in the near future who had a talking gun. It was a sort of a science fiction thriller. And that came out in like 98, 97 and just bombed horribly. And I was so depressed at the time, but then I was doing this book called The Comic History of Comics. I sort of realized, well, wait a minute, this was the absolute worst year historically to attempt to do something in the direct market. And so I was like, history! You really crushed me, but I hung in there, and now I'm here.
I think the first professional comic book I did was in 1987. This is like 2 years after working as an assistant, as I said before, for Howard Chaykin, Walt Simonson, and Bill Sienkiewicz on comics like American Flag, Thor, and New Mutants, and Elektra Assassin. And then a couple of years later, I co-created a comic called The Verdict for a publisher called Eternity Comics with writer Martin Powell. And then, again, this was a time when I had no confidence in writing myself. And it wasn't until about 1995 that I created a character called Billy Dogma. And little by small, I've been writing, and I was just writing screenplays and all kinds of stuff. And then, as was said before, me and Fred both have plays in this comic book theater festival in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, where I dusted off this old play of mine from the early '90s. It's now been produced.
Which origin story do you want? My first comic I did, full comic, was in 1999. I was doing data entry at Coach, who make like wallets and purses, and I was doing data entry at night for them and saving money to go to Comic-Con, and then staying up all night and drawing this comic. It was the longest single piece of comics I'd done before, or at that point, and I went to Kinko's and ran it off, and I had to wait for the copies. Some of the copiers were broken, so the one that was working in the middle of the night, like 24 hours before my plane took off, Spike Lee was on the machine photocopying scripts to Bamboozled. So I was like waiting for Spike to be done so that I could, Xerox my crappy comic. And then I went out to Comic-Con, and I met everybody. Like, I met everybody I'd ever read, anybody I'd ever thought, holy crap, like, wow, like I'm at the circus now, I'm on the floor. And that was really a momentous thing for me. And then I got crits, nice crits, not nasty crits, from people who I considered heroes. And then went back to New York, and within 2 weeks I had gotten a non-creative job at DC Comics, which kept me from doing anything, like publishing any of my own work for a year or so, but I got to meet a lot of I actually met you when I was working at DC Comics. So I guess that's an origin story, right? And if you want to read this horrible little sci-fi comic that I did with like cheap brushes, it's on Activate.
Is it the red? It was a red cover.
Yeah,
I remember that.
Remember that haircut?
Haircut.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, it's awful.
Do you all want to tell the audience something that you're working on or is recent of yours that you're interested, that you want to tell them about, and maybe how to contact you or find you online before we do questions?
Well, you're all here at the writing panel, so if you're interested in writing comics or making comics or doing comics, Greg Pak, the aforementioned co-writer, and I did a book with Random House called Make Comics Like the Pros that's out in September that sort of talks about creating and marketing and doing your own comics. So I brought postcards for you fine audience members, so come up and grab one, and it'll be a nice reminder in September when it comes out. If you want to find me online, if you can spell my name, Fred Van Lente, I'm everywhere under that name, and Twitter.com. It's my Gmail account, so I don't hide.
Well, I just finished 8 months of intensive work adapting Hugh Howey's Omnibus for Wool, which is a science fiction book that he wrote and self-published and made $1 gajillion on all by himself. And that was the most interesting job I've had recently. It was for Amazon. It was their Jet City Comics imprint. It was condensing 600 pages of prose material into 120 pages of artwork and story. And it was an amazing process. I've never collaborated on that kind of level before, where the author of the book. So I went in and I was like, I have had so much stuff trampled on, ripped apart, and scripts that don't have a shred of what I wrote on them, gone from cross-media stuff. So when I talked to him, I said, I was already reading the book. I was reading the book when my daughter was having ballet classes, and then one day I got a phone call from Jimmy saying, "You got a phone call from someone about this science fiction book. Do you know what it is?" And I was like, "I've been telling you about that book for 6 months." And he's like, "So you want the game?" "I want the game. Let's just do this." So basically, Jimmy Broxton did the art. I worked with him before on a Kickstarter project called Sex and Violence, and there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that went into that. It's very interesting to look at someone else's work and adapt it to what I've largely been doing for the last decade was interesting, and being faithful to it. In fact, I was too faithful. When I first drafted the script, he was like, "What is this? It's too much like mine. Do your own thing." So, which you never hear that.
That's cool.
They don't come to you and say, I'm saying I'm going to be completely faithful to your material, and he's saying, "No, make it your own." I don't care. But he lets you build on his universe. You can write novels based on his novels and sell them, and you don't owe him anything. So and that's out now, it's coming out. It's the first issue hit this month, it's in digital, and next month it starts coming out in print. I would buy it in digital, it's $4.99 for all that work.
And that's from Amazon, you said?
Yeah, Amazon, it's on Comixology too, but 6 of this, half a dozen of that.
It's called Wall.
Wool.
It's
Wool.
it's a
Oh,
science
yeah,
fiction
it's
story
open
about
world.
the Earth.
Yeah.
We did something to the Earth where we now live in a hole in the ground, and there's a whole culture of our. There's actually a lack of culture, which I talked to the author about quite a bit. I was like, you took no culture into the hole. So we're basically surviving underground in this upside down skyscraper and growing our own food and managing our own lives. And there's a sheriff, and it's a great story. So it's a Western, it's science fiction, it's all these different elements. And Ridley Scott picked it up like that.
Yeah. I heard a little bit about it.
I know we've been talking about working for franchises and deadlines and then doing creator-owned stuff and having the latitude of that. But just to what you were just saying, I had a really interesting experience adapting a Goosebumps story, Revenge of the Lawn Gnomes. And it was like a 120-page book, and I only had 40 pages to turn into a graphic novel for this collection. And it was such an interesting, I thought I was going to have the worst time, but it was interesting to try to adapt someone else's ideas, other rhythms, turn it into your own so you could serve the story in a different medium.
I was terrified at first.
Yeah.
This looks like I'm climbing at Mount Everest.
Yeah, but then you figured it out once you got to take a stab at it. And so that was really interesting. I'm currently working on, I just wrapped doing some Fantastic Four pages for issues 6 and 7 coming out soon. And there was a brief hiatus from me doing a second Fox series for Archie Red Circle. I believe the first issue comes out in December. Another 5-issue miniseries with Mark Waid doing dialogue over my plot. And one of the things I want to do is start focusing in 2015 and beyond is try to do more creator-owned work, to be honest. I mean, again, I like playing with the toys. In fact, I was pitching Mark Waid a Fantastic Four story today that he liked a lot, so we'll see what happens. But having said that, and that's another thing, another reason why you do that is because it's a better page rate than a royalty,
Yeah.
So that's another reason why you do these jobs. But I do want to focus on creator-owned works, hopefully.
It's hard for a writer because the artist, it takes so much time. It's hard to find someone who's going to commit to your vision and share your vision and add their vision and say,
Right.
hold up, we're going to go do this, and I'm going to take a pay cut, and we're just going to,
Yeah, I think a lot of creator-owned comics, especially with Justin or Fred, where they're the writer and they have to work with an artist, I think often they're willing to take the hit of not really getting paid up front. And then there's the labor of drawing, there's a labor of writing, but there's the real, it takes a long time to draw a page or to draw a comic book.
Yeah, I mean, a writer can do 6 projects at once.
Yeah.
Impossible for an artist.
So you can be doing 4 paid projects and be writing 2
Exactly.
unpaid projects, and it's harder for an artist to do 1 unpaid project.
Exactly.
So that you have to confront that a lot. And also have real quick, next week is a graphic novel. It's Fear My Dear, a Billy Dogma experience, which collects my favorite Billy Dogma stories into one graphic novel.
I have coming out towards the end of the year from IDW the second volume of Red Light Properties, which is called Underwater, which has a ton of new material and also reprints some of my favorite stories that I've done in the series so far, with a lot more, like an ongoing series coming out from IDW in the following year. But also, what I'm working on throughout the summer is a really cool project called Priya's Shakti, which is a comic that I'm doing. It's I'm working with a bunch of people, including some NGOs in Europe and India, and what this is we're using Hindu gods to create a new Indian myth that speaks to the problem in contemporary Indian society of rape, which is, as you know, like a huge deal, has been in the mainstream media for the last 2 years at least. Priya Shakti, I'm co-writing it and I'm drawing it. We're going to premiere it in Mumbai. I'm flying to India and we're going to launch it at the Mumbai Comic-Con, but it will also be at a bunch of gallery openings in Europe and in the United States on the coasts, and it will be coming out in December. For me, it's a dream because I love the iconography of Hinduism and the gods and how beautiful and cosmically trippy everything is. It's like doing Doctor Strange, but you get to reach millions of people instantly because it's their religion. It's kind of a dream. I'm having a lot of fun with it right now. So that will be out. I don't know. It will definitely be published digitally in English. I do not know about print yet, but I will let you know. I'll let Hannah know.
Yes, you should. Well, thank you. Okay, so a couple minutes for questions, a few minutes. Yeah. Here in the stripes? Yeah.
What is the most frustrating thing each of you has encountered working for any publisher that you've worked for?
Did you hear that? What's the most frustrating thing each of you has
Well, I want to
encountered?
work for them again, so I'm not going to tell you. You know, whenever you don't have the power at what in movies calls, you know, final cut, if you don't have the final say and you're forced to do something that you just think is wrong-headed, I mean, that's very frustrating. I've been very lucky that 9 times out of 10, even if I don't agree with a mandate or a note, I figure out a way to make it work. I think Gaiman said something that was very interesting, which is that if somebody says something is wrong with your writing, they're usually right, but their solution is almost always wrong. Mm-hmm. So what you have to do is find solutions that work for you.
I've done a lot of work not in comics publishing, but with my comics have been published by book publishers in the book trade for the last 8 years or so, and the problem that I've had, and I'll say this publicly, is that big book publishers, that like the ones I've been published by, they don't speak comics, they don't understand the medium.
They still don't.
They don't get it. They don't know how to market to this audience at all. So. Every book I've done, every graphic novel, like for the book trade that I've done that's come out, has been certified cool, has been a pick of the month in the Diamond catalog, and then never solicited again. So it's like, bloop, bloop, and that's it. And that's the whole life of the book in the direct market. So it bums me out because I've done like thousands of pages of comics, and almost every single comic shop that I go into does not have anything I've ever done. For that reason, because my publishers, like I can get my books on Amazon and I can go into Barnes & Noble and sometimes they're even there, but the comic shops only ever stocked it once and people might have liked it. They probably ordered 2, because that's how things are now. Yeah. But that's my beef, and so for me working with IDW now is cool because I actually get somebody that knows how to interact with the direct market and use the tools that we've created to move our products.
I basically, the same thing. I mean, real quick, as an old artist but a young writer, I've been pretty lucky with my stories, but a couple times when they have been rejiggered, again, editorially, I have to respect it's not my toy. So what do you guys want again? And then I try to figure out around that, and then actually what I've done recently is, if I can't come with a solution, you're the editor, you wanted this change, what do you want? And then I try to fit it around that.
One more answer?
I'm just frustrated by the size of the direct market and the fact that the material that gets supported enough to make, there's just not enough. There's not enough material. There's not enough variety of material, and there's not a big enough audience to support material outside of that core of people who can wear any color.
Okay, thank you. I think we're going to have to stop. Wasn't that someone just
If you guys have can I just say, if you have questions, just come up to us.
Yeah, come to our tables.
They all
Come
have
get a postcard
tables.
if you want one.
Yeah, you all have tables, right? You're all tabling today?
Yeah,
Okay.
all the tables too, but we're here.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you guys for coming.
I thought there was another one.
It all goes it just might. Yeah, get close. Act like you like each other. Not that much.
It's a little too much. I can smell your
Tom, did you
corned
come?
beef.
Thanks a lot, guys.
We started a little
Thank you.
bit.
Oh, that's awesome.
So is there one right now?
Your Game Boy?
Oh, okay.
What advice do you have for young aspiring writers to where to start and what they should do?